Just not getting it.
They don't do what we do and talk to people that, actually may have a different opinion.
It's a fallacy in this country that there's been objective journalism. It's absolutely impossible. You cannot be an objective journalist. You pick your words for a reason and they come from your particular slant. B, up until 1900, the term didn't even exist. You had papers that were clearly one side or the other. And I don't mind seeing a return to that, to be perfectly honest. You can't tell me that MSNBC is not clearly liberal, and you can't tell me that Fox isn't clearly conservative.
I don't know. I think
It's a reasonable thing if you want to be semi-educated. Watch both. Make a decision and go on the line.
I don't think you should pick one news source to ever base your facts.
Yeah, you're a fool if you do.
I would rather people be honest and say, listen, there's not objective journalism, so why don't we just represent the viewpoint that we have, and go for that. And hopefully people are smart enough to get more than one side of the story. But even with objective journalism, it was never objective.
Well, yesterday I checked out Fox News. I went to MSNBC. You're going to get two sides of the story there.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't agree with both sides, but generally I'm in the middle. So.
Yeah, and somewhere in the middle is.
But I'm smart enough. But I'm smart enough to go turn around and find two things. One other thing I want to point out too. We've had a little bit of failure in the government, especially this current government. They're after the wrong people sometimes. They really kind of want to. We got to check out the white extremists. We got to check out different extreme groups. And to a point, yes, you have to do that. But the main threat comes from the Muslim extremists. And yet they have to admit this. They have to admit this and put a much harder effort into going after these people and realizing what the main threat is when it comes to the terrorism like we had the other night.
I don't necessarily know. I don't agree with that either, because if you look at just this year or in the last 6 months,
it did take them a long time to even say Muslim extremists though.
Over the last 6 months.
They're having trouble dealing with the issue.
If you look at the shootings that have occurred, I don't even know if it's half and half. The shootings of the church, that was a white guy.
Yeah,
that was racial.
Well, you know what? That's actually a good place.
What about the guy they picked up in West Hollywood the next day?
Yeah.
That's
Well,
actually
the other thing that happened that nobody's even talking about, they had the gay pride parade, and there was a guy that was going there with guns.
That's what I'm saying.
He was white.
Yes.
So nobody is talking about that because this, and rightly so, this has overshadowed it, but it's not just Muslim extremists.
Well, DW brought that up to me today, and he said, well, Fox News didn't even cover that. Well, that's not true, because I heard it on Fox News early this morning that they had this guy do that. I also heard it on 710 this morning. I also heard it on 980 this morning. Right. They did talk about this guy.
But I didn't see it, and I was glued to my couch all weekend and did not see it once on TV.
They start talking. They start talking about
I
today.
will say I saw it a bunch.
But the problem with that is
first they thought they were related, could be potentially related.
They're so in tune to Orlando. When the media cycle hits it, they will not come off of it.
Yeah, and it might have just been the
It's
channels we were watching.
when OJ did the slow ride.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
There couldn't have been an atomic bomb gone off someplace else, and they probably wouldn't have pulled off on the OJ slow ride.
Yeah, really.
To cover the atomic bomb until an hour later.
Yeah. I got a
real, right?
Yeah, I got an elephant in the room, being the only black person, because I know that.
It's an elephant in the room.
Just let me come around to the point, in that. And everybody may disagree, but I have a hard time seeing it differently, because, like you say, because I'm a balanced person, and but this got bad when we elected a black president. People, you started hearing so much. We're losing the country. We're losing this, and my thought was always, losing what exactly? I'm like, as a general rule, white males run our government. They run the vast majority of industry. What exactly are we losing simply because of the election of one man? That's when I started hearing so much about they're going to take our guns from us, and I'm like, wait. First of all, I don't recall, and I've heard every speech he's given.
That was
him
almost immediate.
Ever saying he was going to do anything of the sort.
I would agree with that.
And
I've said that about every Democratic president since Jimmy Carter.
But it's been in a special.
It's a huge mantra.
He's always called for gun control.
Yeah, but it's
But
been
he's
in
never
a.
said I'm gonna take the guns away. Now
It's been
Hillary
a
has said she wants
special-
Australia solved.
It's been a special level of vitriol since Obama took office that I've just never noticed under any other president. I've noticed vitriol. I've noticed people, doing and saying and acting badly over the years. It's just this was a level of mean-spirited that I had never seen before.
But don't you think this is an evolution in our country?
I do.
We have to get used
I do.
to people that are going to be of different color or different gender
Yeah.
being our president.
Well, I think
this is a learning experience for the country
yeah,
too.
I've always thought that, kind of getting back to the hunting point, a wounded animal cries loudest when it's nearest death. And that's kind of how I feel about kind of the overtly racist element. I mean, I think there's some subversive elements, definitely, that may never go away. But the overtly racist element of the country, it got loud when Obama took office, because I think I think it was something that and for that matter, I think black people never thought it would happen. So I'm sure if we never thought it would happen, nobody thought it would happen.
But then you had Ferguson, and Ferguson put a whole different element into it, because Ferguson spawned the Black Lives Movement. It spawned a lot of different things, and it's a delicate subject, especially as a white man talking about, old white man talking about, that it's the hardest thing for me to say, but it was somewhat why there was problems in Ferguson with the police department, and that's obvious. Still, the young man charged the cop, and it came out, the truth came out that it wasn't exactly as everybody wanted to say it was. And that's been a hard truth that people have had trouble accepting.
I will say that Ferguson,
out of everything bad will come some good.
Yeah, I will say that there have definitely been those cases that, where you were dealing with, like a police shooting in particular, that, that the person that got shot, wasn't doing the right thing, or they weren't a good person. I'm not going to say everybody that's gotten, everybody that's gotten shot and killed were good people, but I think where the Black Lives Matter movement, what it really means, what it really stands for is that, at the end of the day, you can have, a guy that charged the cop and they get shot, and it's a tragedy, and I don't think even then they deserve to die. Maybe you need to stop them, put them down, so that they don't hurt the.
It doesn't need to be lethal.
But they don't. But it doesn't need to be lethal.
It's hard to put yourself in the situation of that man where he was.
It
didn't fear for his life.
But you know what? That's the phrase right there.
That's a tough situation.
That's the phrase that bothers me every time, Dave. He feared for his life. because and I know this is...
You're saying he has a gun and the other kid didn't?
Yeah, because when did we stop training police to police? And we started training them as a small military. Because we're not, because this is the thing. You know, you've got, you know, like Trayvon, who's getting stalked around his own neighborhood, and he gets killed because he stands up for himself against the guy who's stalking him. And then nothing happens to the guy.
And again, none of us run that jury, none of us know all the facts, and I think that is, I think what we're finding is just a lot of misreporting and bad reporting of things. In my mind, I would say two things. One, I think there's a legitimate and real problem, clearly, with, I would say the Cleveland example is the best example.
Okay,
If Black Lives Matter as a group wants to get behind a real cause and make a point, they get behind the ones that are clearly and obviously wrong, you know, and make a point with that. But these ones that are hyper questionable, where nobody really knows what the hell happened, you know, and that could have gone either way. I wasn't there and you weren't there, and I do not believe that people acquit people just because they want to. And I don't believe that there's 12 unanimously racist people who just go, you know what, I'm so fucking
No, it was,
racist anymore.
in Zimmerman's case, it was one juror that held that over.
Could have
It
held
was
up at
one juror.
Yeah, no, and I do agree that.
But I do think that there's again, I think you get Jesse Jackson in the mix, Al Sharpton in the mix, and all of a sudden you're losing all focus. It becomes less about the injustice and more about trying to some degree stay relevant and have these weird, you know, social media events and public things. And I'll say this too, and you and I both spent a shit ton of time in Chicago.
Yeah.
I was there a couple of weeks back, I guess maybe it's last summer. 26 people killed in one weekend. That wasn't white cops shooting black kids, that was black kids shooting black kids.
Yeah, I mean, no, that
real
which really.
If Black Lives Matter really wants to make an effort, then I would start focusing right there.
Yeah, I mean, which really the Orlando was kind of the straw that kind of broke the camel's back in me wanting to, you know, talk about, you know, a subject, you know, like guns, but it's really been building up for a while. It's between all of the kind of police shootings and being from Chicago and knowing that there's just a ton of violence in the streets, and it's been that way for years. You know, I guess the thing that bothers me the most is nobody's figured out what to do to help any of it.
Yeah.
And because I mean, I guarantee the kids on the street in Chicago, they didn't go to a gun store or a gun show to get that gun.
Agreed.
So
There's not a serial number on
They
there.
bought it
yeah, I
off
mean,
the street.
and there's
And it was likely stolen.
yeah, and which is which is the reason I didn't really lead with that type of a subject, because that's a different topic. That's that's a like you say, how do you keep guns off the street is a very different story than how do you keep the gun out of the hand of the mass shooter. And I don't know.
This is the problem that most white people have with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult subject for us to talk to black people about. It's a very difficult subject because in my generation in particular, and we're an older generation, to a man that I know, very few of us have prejudices. I only know a few of them that are prejudiced, and they're ignorant people. They really are. They're just ignorant people. They're not informed. They're the people you were talking about.
Sure.
They're not informed. They have no understanding of the greater world around them. But it's a difficult, and that's why we have troubles with Black Lives Matter, is that, folks, you're not really gathering this into the right context. you have some legitimate points, and you have things that you're bringing up that are legitimate, but you're also way off base in some areas that are just outrageously out of base. And we're having trouble assimilating this. And we're trying to say, okay, we're trying to understand you. But at the same time, I think that if you don't want to make yourself a victim. You know how I am about victim and survivors. You know how strong I am on that.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't want to make yourself a victim. Don't make yourself a victim. Find a way to be a survivor. Find a way to help other people be survivors with you.
I agree with that.
That's my point.
I agree with that.
And that's the thing, that they need to be going into the neighborhoods. You look at some of these groups we have in Kansas City. We really have an amazing city. Yes, we have killings here.
Yeah.
But we have these mothers out there that have an active group. We have, Alvin Brooks and his group. We have a lot of people that are really honestly fighting on the street for their communities. And that's what makes Kansas City different from St. Louis in 100 different ways. Did we ever riot over Ferguson? No. We had some peaceful protests. But nothing ever happened for it. What's happening here in Kansas City that makes that different? I don't think these people are trying to make themselves victims. They're trying to better themselves. You look at the Ivanhoe neighborhood. And I built houses down in the hood in several different occasions. I've worked in these areas. And I've gained a little bit of understanding. I've worked with Gwen Grant from the Urban League. And I've worked with Boys Hope. You know of my charities, and I deeply care. And it is, they have to be careful how they victimize themselves. They have to be very careful about it. Do not make yourself a victim. You never get anywhere if you make yourself a victim.
Yeah, and I definitely do agree with that. I think that there is a point where, as a black person, it just hurts to see, somebody that did not need to die. Maybe they were doing something wrong and they needed to be.
But did they need to die over something trivial?
Exactly.
And that's what we see when we see the murder on the streets in our hoods. We see some that they get shot over bullshit.
Absolutely. Which is the reason why I agree with you.
And it's very difficult for us to look at that and justify it in any kind of way. We wonder, what the hell happened here?
I mean, which truly is a conversation that is much larger than this episode of the podcast.
It'd be good for another podcast.
Because there's so many elements that go into why so many of the hoods have gone into such horrible places. I mean, there's family issues and socioeconomic issues.
Bingo. One of the things that Gwen brought up to me, how many kids have to get themselves up and go to school? They have no parent to get themselves up and go to school. They have to do it on their own. And they get their food at school because they don't get their food at home. These are issues that, as the general white public, it's hard for us to put ourselves in those people's shoes and understanding. And I can't say we're guilty of that, but it's beyond our comprehension somewhat. And then we got poor whites that have the same problem.
Yeah.
It's a generational thing that's happened where it's been failure upon failure upon failure of generations. My argument became somewhat from the Great Society and Johnson and all that. That's like I said, that's a whole nother subject for another time. But there's been a failure there, and it's disturbing. It's hard to watch in the morning when you turn on the news and see who's been killed on what street, and you know where the street is. And it's a tough thing to watch and comprehend, because for me, I'm always thinking, how could that individual been saved? How could that individual been brought forward in life to be a productive citizen? And it's hard to understand the social economic things that they deal with. I've tried to get young men to work for me out of the hood, and it's been a strong learning process for me. because in some ways I've failed them. I've tried to coach them, but in some ways I've failed them. However, I just picked up a young man, 18 years old, fit to work for me, doing great. But he's being coached from a young age.
Yeah, yes.
He was with AAU basketball. My friend Reggie Hines has been kind of calls him his uncle. You know, he's been there. He's been in the Mayor's program. The Mayor's program. Sly has a good program for these kids. And this is what it takes. The curfew on the plaza. Some people may raise their hand. No, that's a good thing because it gets these kids in the community center where mentors can be there talking to them and say, you can be better. You can do this. You have to find a way.
Yeah, I think, I think we've actually touched on some pretty amazing points, and I think one of the bigger issues or whatever is that whether it's neighborhood gun violence or mass shootings or or whatever, I think to me it all comes down to the same basic point, and and that actually has little to do with the gun itself or if somebody's mental health is off but I think in America we're starting to really see a vacuum of hope.
Yes.
Like I think all of the people who've just said, oh, I'm going to join ISIS or just hey, my mom worked 2 jobs and she still don't make no damn money, and so I got to get out here in the streets and hustle and do what I got to do. I think it all boils down to the same place. There's a vacuum of hope, and I think, and it's not even a thing. I know in this session we're not going to solve that large a world issue, but I do know that it starts with what we're doing today. It starts with people who may have very different viewpoints, but they're willing to sit down
Have
and
an honest conversation.
and do what young Brian said, and be willing to give inches in order to get to a place that is balanced, so that we can help America live up to its creed. So before I close out, anything else anybody else can say?
No, I think number one, I'm a believer in prayer. Prayer can do amazing things. I think everybody out there in the podcast, whether you're agnostic or not, find a way to find a greater thing about yourself, a greater thing about the world, and pray that we have a better world. Find a way to find that better world, and that can be helped through prayer sometimes.
Chris?
I would highly caution people to not just react to modern times but understand history. These are things that have been around forever. They're not new. I don't think they're escalating. I don't think there's a lack of hope, more so than there was in years past. I just think that it's a more immediate information cycle, and maybe people are talking about it more, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. In fact, in a lot of ways, if you can harness that correctly, I think that could be a very good thing. And so I would say, listen, never lose sight of the progress that's been made as a country, but just because we can do better doesn't mean we're doing badly. I think that there's a lot of room for growth, but I think there's been a hell of a lot of great accomplishments that have happened, especially over the last 50 years, if you want to look at it, to be perfectly honest. And so, in a lot of ways, the country's going in the right direction in my head. And so, yes, of course it needs to get better, but don't forget that it's come a long way in 350 plus years. The case may be.
Allow us to see that.
I think it's all about educating yourself. in a rounded way, and not taking somebody else's view as your own without knowing why you're doing it. I know too many people that hear somebody else say something and it's immediately what they believe and what they think.
I agree, that's well
And-
said.
And I think that it's very important for you to have your own ideals and your own beliefs and stick to them.
Yeah,
And, I mean, that's a hard thing to do, but
Yeah, I think I want to end before we toast. I think Dr. King's words are kind of coming to me, in that, you know, to Chris's point, you know, that the arc of, you know, the moral arc bends towards justice. It may be long, but it always bends toward justice. And as long as we, you know, can gather and talk and have intelligent, constructive conversation, you know, I think that we will always be on the side of hope, and, you know, always be on the side of justice. And, you know, that right there actually may be what we need to do.
I will tell you, Dr. King is a hero of mine, and I will toast to Dr. King.
So, as I always end every podcast,